introducing presenting Dr. Michael F. Steger. He's the director for the Laboratory for the Study of Meaning and Quality of Life at Colorado State University Fort Collins, and has spent close to 15 years researching the factors that promote health, flourishing, and well-being. He's internationally recognized for his research on the benefits of finding meaning in one's life and in one's work. He is a developer of the Meaning in Life questionnaire. He has published more than 100 articles, peer-reviewed journal articles on book chapters, and his published works include Designing Positive Psychology and Purpose and Meaning in the Workplace, as well as a forthcoming handbook of positivity and strengths-based approaches at work. Michael currently serves as editor-in-chief of the journal Psychology of Wellbeing and on the editorial boards of numerous other journals. He enjoys providing keynote speeches, workshops, training, and consulting around the world on the topics of meaning, purpose, meaningful work, and well-being. Please listen to a warm welcome to Michael.
While I get used to how loud to use my voice, I usually just shout. I teach abnormal psychology. Talk about dialectics. I teach abnormal psychology to 200 undergrads every semester. So usually I just yell. And my kids appreciate that too. Well, so if we take a step back, so Luis in his very gracious introduction mentioned that I created a questionnaire. We have many brilliant questionnaire creators in this room. And then it struck me at one point, especially after I read this inspirational quote by King Alfred. Carol, can you read this?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, Gif ye darn night darnaki mean. My life changed when I read that. Because this is my struggle with trying to figure out what this means. Is that any different than what we're asking our research participants to do? Whenever we think about meaning, eventually we end up asking other people to respond to some words that we give them. One of the words that we care about is meaning, right? So I also was recently involved in a collaboration with Frank Martela at University of Helsinki in taking one more step in kind of like model development within what meaning in life really is comprised of. Typically in the literature we've talked about things like comprehension or coherence, where people have the ability to make sense of their lives, who they are, what the world is all about. And the other word we hear a lot is purpose, right? So people having this sense of a highly valued, sort of self-organizing, key set of open-ended goals that they wish to pursue throughout their lifetime. So those things have appeared in the literature over time, and other writers like Laura King, myself, Paul Wong, Gary Rieker have identified these as being core facets when we talk about meaning. And we thought there was a third one in there. There's actually been multiple groups who've said there's probably a third dimension in there. Something maybe more evaluative. Like the holy grail of meaning in life measurement has been this idea of an emotional meaning in life segment. It's been proposed for years. I think because we like the affect behavior, affect cognitive, motivational triad, right? But we don't have one in meaning. So we decided there might be an evaluative component, the significance, right? When life is significant, worthwhile, and all that sort of stuff. And so we develop these ideas, we go back into the theorists, we go back into our own previous writings, we go into what theorists say about other theorists, we think about what experts say about what other theorists say about experts and other theorists, and then we ask the other theorists and the experts and the other psychologists and ourselves and other theorists and experts and people who said something one day. And we try to figure out what is it that we're doing in this field, which is in the end, at least in my little baby steps way of doing this research, is asking people, what does your life mean? So what does that word mean? So I wanted to try to at least explore, have a little fun with a new idea to me, very old to most everybody else. What are we looking at when we look at meaning? And can we just dissect the sort of, so I want you to have in your mind the image of a water bowl, right? And at a water hole, you see these, if you look out from it, it looks a little bit like the iris of an eye, right? There's a pupil, that's the hole, and you have like strong trails that lead, but all these little paths converge. Languages are the paths that converge around how people use words. So I just said, well, hey, I can either try to figure out this stuff on my own, or I can take the really easy approach, at least to start, with the Oxford English Dictionary, and just see where do these words come from that we cherish in meaning. So the original idea was to keep going. Let's go as far as I can take it. What's the etymology of the word meaning and meaning? What are the key ideas that emerge? Then what can we do? Can we turn those into functions that people need to perform in order to create meaning? Once we turn those in there, can we identify any cognitive efficiencies? In other words, in order to create meaning, we have to be good at certain things. Figuring things out, whatever it is. And then from there, can we take a look at the neural executions that need to be done, in which case we'll be able to help lead towards maybe more discrete brain substrates than the ones that Carol talked about, right? So we had the anterior cingulate cortex, we had the amygdala, and with the ventral striatum, those things show up in multiple tasks, which makes it hard to really pinpoint meaning. So maybe if we just break it down into the way that humans have used this word, and at least English-speaking humans, then we could get to the brain level, and we could get these biological tasks, these biological markers, which then give us another basis for testing whether we have good interventions, and so on. But this way of just taking a look at language also is readily transportable into other language traditions. Right now, there seem to be two choices when we want to learn about meaning. We import questionnaires or research paradigms, mostly from Western European influenced countries in Europe or in North America, and we hope it works somewhere else. Or we start trying to get some ground-up research about what is this topic like. Well, maybe we can get a little bit advanced if we start off and say, well, what are the roots of the Spanish language appropriate uses for the word meaning? What in Mandarin? What in Cantonese? Right? Maybe this is a way that we can just quickly go through dictionaries around the world. Now, I am pitiful at languages. I barely speak English. I'm almost monolingual, and I can't really do this in other languages. But this is an exercise to try to see what comes up. Because in the end, we can agree on some things, even if we can't say why we agree. So what are these? Shares. This is a really smart group. I mean, most people don't have any clue. Is it monkeys? Are they all monkeys? Is this a forest? No, these are all chairs, right? And so once we have our paradigm and our prototype in our minds, we start to ask interesting questions. Do different people like different kinds of chairs or meaning? Are some types of chairs or meaning better than others? Are some easier to get than others? What happens when people lose their meaning or their chairs? No offense, peers. We saw sadly what happens when people lose their chairs. It makes us all sad. Is it better to have many of one type of chair, or to have numerous different diverse chairs in your life? Right. So once we have this idea in our mind, we need to ask more sophisticated, interesting questions. The questions that got us intrigued in this topic and other related topics in the first place. Not on a scale of 1 to 7. Do you like chairs? Do you think you have enough chairs in your life? But what is the deal with chairs in your life? What is the deal with meaning? Does it really count? Is it horrible, evil, malicious, malevolent, violent, destructive chair the same thing as like a Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela chair, right? So are we talking about the same thing? So this was the idea. Now, if we take a look at what chairs are, and the first definition is scientific dictionary. This is why I was also getting tired of considering what our expert class has to say about this. A 6-membered ring conformation wherein the atoms alternate positions above and below their own mean plane stable conformation of cyclohexane or aldohexoses. That's not what we think when we think of a chair. Now, that's a very specific utilization of the word chair. It's very jargony. And sometimes I, at least, am very vulnerable to being jargony about what I'm studying. And what I really want to study is the guts of what makes life worth living, right? So we don't like that. So we go to the Oxford English Dictionary, which is great because it's online, and I don't have to go get all 100 versions of it. And it links to some interesting things. They've done a lot of work. Dictionaries are incredible. So if you've gone to London and suddenly you realize you're near the Samuel Johnson House, which is near the old Later pub, in case you want to check that out too, right? And you realize, oh my gosh, this was like an idea that someone had. Like, wait, people use language. Let's bring that in one place and figure out what to do with it. So that's there's a lot done. And we see that a seat for one person is basically what a chair was. That seems a lot more usable, a lot more intuitive than some of the scientific definitions we come up with. So I think we can go far just by taking a look at this. Now, if we go to the beginning of the uses of the word, this is again limited by linguistics, time, professional expertise. I'm sure anthropologists, ancient language scholars will be able to change this. But the first thing that comes up as a word that's been translated, at least in terms of chronology, into the word meaning that we like, is from Ecclesiastes, the Judeo-Christian book of wisdom and general party stoppers of depression. I also thought, as for men, God tests them, so they may see they're like the animals. And they were sexist back then. So they should say men or women, but they don't. So man's fate is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. We have no advantage over the animal. Everything is meaningless. So if this is correct, the very first mention of meaning is everything is meaningless. I think it was an interesting spin on it. Also, it predates care management theory and the work of Ernest Becker by about 2,219 years. So that's kind of interesting. Are we really that set on abandoning the ideas of the past because we're so smart with our own current methods? Maybe not. We're the same creature and we all die. And turn into goo or what you see in the butcher store, which is depressing sometimes, right? Which is why we want to be able to answer something here. So, the first trace that Oxford English Dictionary tells us we find is Germanic. And Germanic turns into lots of different languages. I had no idea. This is kind of fun to see what it's explicitly say. So this Maniti from the ancient Germanic, remember these are the people who helped topple Rome. So they knew what they were doing. You get Dutch, Saxon, Frisian, Old German, Church German, Low German, Middle German, High German, Low Middle German, and of course Middle High German. It's kind of like a fun song, this thing. Should we do it? Okay, we'll start at the top. Dutch, Saxon, Frisian, Old German, Church German, now we're going to try Low German, Middle German, High German, Low Middle German, Middle High German. And it all kind of gets this root, and this is about mid-13th century. So 1250-something, we see this use appear and proliferate throughout all these language groups. And again, this is a group of people and cultures that spread quickly and quite influentially over Europe. Then we've got the French version. Oh, the French. Now, so this comes from Latin, so in a sense this goes even further back, but this was really used, when you think about the median, we still use the Latin version of this word. Now, I have to admit, I may have been a little inspired when I saw Alex in Vancouver talk about the word opa and break it down. But I'm sure, opa, I'm sure it had nothing to do with this at all, right? So, but I do like the idea that we are a cultural species. Culture is the gigantic Las Vegas-style buffet of meanings we try to choose from. So what can we learn from this approach? And again, it's nice for me because I don't have to think about science sometimes. I get to be a person again. So this turns into this group, Mene, and that's about 14th century. So here already we have hundreds of years of people trying to figure out and using these words. And in a sense, they compete with each other and they change over time, which I think is sort of fascinating as well. So the oldest Oxford English Dictionary citation. I'm going to try. I don't know. I really know what I'm doing. I could be pronouncing every single syllable wrong. On few Weise will have return to him on Hütte, on Festene, on Opa, on meaning. Got your attention with the last word, right? Sweet. Someone did something Bahudi style on the meaning. I don't know what that means. They don't provide translations. This is training wheels, but they don't have training wheels big enough for someone like me. So we go to the next one, 100 years later. Beside me heard a meaning, also it were a woman shrieking. I type in women shrieking and I find Kenny G, famous and soothing saxophone player. But this is extremely exciting news for me. That the first time I actually have some clue of what the Oxford English Dictionary is pulling on the hundreds of years of literature is that shrieking is the same thing as moaning. It's a lamentation. It's an attestation of one's miserable state. which means we are now the International Network on Personal Moaning, which is not so far from what most typical psychological associations turn into eventually. So I think they're glad that we predated this at all. So I'm a moaning researcher. You're lucky, Carol, you're a purpose researcher, and you're a harmonic well-being researcher, but some of us are just... Okay, so this is fun to think about. But we can keep going further. We can actually use Chaucer to show how quickly languages move and how we share ideas, bring ideas, use ideas, that actually we can see parallel ideas forming. I think some of these will start to seem really familiar to you if you dug in. So the French tradition, a temperance holdeth the mean in all things. The golden mean used to be something we cared about, not scoffed at because it doesn't mean to yachts. Seek ye would that mine intent is clean, take heed thereof, for I not evil mean. Say that my intent is clean, for no evil do I mean. So we start to see, right, two different traditions. Both from Chaucer, so the mean comes from medianus, and this we start to see about intent and things like that emerge. So we take things together, we look at the French tradition, because it's a little bit more circumspect. The motion of the sun in mean longitude, a means to an end, a happy mean, petty and mean streets, mean-hearted. Is that what we study now? There's a really interesting story about humanity in that French column that we'll spend a little bit of time on. Then we get to the Germanic tradition, which I think feels a little bit familiar as well. No evil do I mean. That air was meant for me. We're almost fated for something, right? There's an intention for something outside of ourselves for us. If that doesn't sound like Frankel to you, then maybe I don't know what I'm talking about Frankel. Our meaning is to uplift, say it like you mean it, and the meaning of life. So two traditions, two ways of taking a look at what are people thinking about perhaps, or maybe why did we get attracted to this field in the first place. But I really want to talk about my own personal moaning, which is that mean at one point meant middle. It converted to shared. So things that were mean were shared among people. You had mean characteristics. That turned into common. It's common, our common fate, our common weal, our common good. That turned into vulgar. That turned into awful. Mean people suck. Meaning is awesome. We do that with our societies, don't we? The things that are common, average. Who wants to be average? Raise a kid that for sure is average in every way, except in Lake Wobegon, right? But we turn the average and the shared into something vulgar and despicable. And I think we start to see some of these trends emerge. I'm hoping at least enough time to close with a powerful paper that one of my graduate advisors, Shigeru Oishi, produced with his own advisors, my grandpa advisor, and Diener, on wealth and meaning around the world. And if you dig into that paper, some alarming things emerge about what we could be looking at as the future for meaning. So anyways, that's my moaning. Here's the word, the French tradition. If you trust me to sort of just like compile some ideas, we have intermediary or in the middle, the route or method, shared among entities. So when Baumeister characterizes meaning as a network or a set of associations among objects, ideas, principles, or relationships, Baumeister is French tradition, right? If we take a look over here, what is intended, made known, signified, opined, or held in mind, right? So in some sense, the Germanic tradition is how do we take something from inside our heads and convey it to someone, convey it to life? So here we get a little bit more purposeful into it. So if I was to sort of translate these things into meaning in life-ology, I'd say meaning in life is a set of connections and pathways linking and transiting through elements in a person's life, if I was just purely speaking French. If I was purely speaking German, I might say meaning is life is the mental world of an individual that's intended to be conveyed into and enacted among others. It's not that far off, as if it's a little different. So, do we gain anything new? Maybe. Hopefully at least we gain a recognition of how we've been influenced throughout our time as we speak English. And hopefully if we do this in our language, which we learn even more about what people care about meaning and purpose. But what if we take a look back at some of the little psychological theories and see if we can find some roots of how we approach this topic now. This guy, Viktor Frankl, is probably the very first step most of us took into this area. For sure it was for me before I even knew what I was doing. I started reading Frankel when I was still working at an asphalt processing plant. So that was an important change for me. You know, the asphalt processing plant, that was the best job you could get in my town without a college degree, so I was pretty thrilled. I was slowly dying, but that's okay. And killing the planet while I did it, but that's also okay, because Frankel said there's really way more to the story. We don't give up, right? It's hard to pin down Frankel's definition of meaning in life, at least from this book. He describes so much richness and so much inspiration around it, but the definitions we get, it's a little bit harder to do. There are many more people in this room that are experts in Frankel than me, so if I'm wrong, let me know. But something around worthwhileness in life is provided by the sense of purpose and the pursuit of purpose, an embrace of purpose, discovery of purpose, and some specific vocation or mission in life to carry out a concrete assignment which demands fulfillment. Feels very Germanic. Life holds a task in store for us, and for me, when I think about this, I think we should be asking, will I get meaning in my life? But how will meaning use my life? So almost somehow we are conveying something more important than ourselves if we really hold to the Frankel's ideas in this sense. Then we move on to Eric Klinger, who I think was a fantastic thinker on this topic, and also, these have been the first 3 books that came out that we're going to discuss. So 1977, best title still for a meaning book. Does anyone remember this one?
Meaning and Void.
Meaning and Void. How cool. Everything else, Carol's got some good titles, but that's really still pretty good, right? So, purpose evolved. He took seriously the idea that we're creatures too. Right? Just like Ecclesiastes said, we draw this thing about as animals. Maybe something about our animalness influences the way that we search for purpose. So purpose evolved from the need for mobile creatures to go seek what they need to survive. We're not sea anemones, we're not oysters, we're not trees, where we maximize whatever comes across our path. We have to go out of our little holes and seek something in the world. It's dangerous, it's risky, it's anti-American. It's an American cat, by the way. It's got everything it needs, doesn't have to go anywhere, right? And in fact, most technology, so this is a sidebar. Productivity went down again in the United States, right? So our economy technically can't grow unless productivity goes up. Technological advances have gone up, but somehow technological advances are not. For the first time in the industrial economies of the world, technological advances are not advancing productivity. Because technological advances are basically versions of this, right? How can we create technology to do stuff for us that we are perfectly capable of doing for ourselves? So, I don't know, that's my theory. I'm not an economist. So, what does this mean? Purpose and meaning are rooted in activities that people intend to do, what they feel they were put on earth to do. That's very close to a quote from Klinger. So perhaps then Klinger is saying that the intention and function of a person's life is what purpose is all about. And finally, Baumeister, 1991, and all of these things, at the time that these books were written, you could probably count the number of empirical articles on meaning in life on your fingers and toes, right? So there was Batiste and Ullman, there was some by Crumbaugh. This is Chamberlain and Zika had 2 of their papers appear by then. D-Bots had just been getting going on his work, so there was some foundational research going on for sure, but not a lot. So this was the rich time of theory. And Baumeister came in with his typical way, read about 4,000 articles on things that had nothing to do with meaning, and figured out what really meaning is all about, right? It's sort of incredible, but this was a passion for him. And meaning is connection and relation. And he puts purpose as a need for meaning, which I think is an interesting idea. You can't have meaning unless you get purpose, but purpose on its own is a means to an end, unintentionally. It's hard to talk about meaning without using the word mean as like a meaning in this way. Meaning is shared mental representation of possible relationships among things, events, and relationships. Meaning connects things. So if we're talking with people about meaning, maybe these are the things that we come up with. So we kind of come up with approximate definitions. We have Frankel, pursuit of a mission uniquely fated for one's life. That arrow was meant for me. Activities that people intend to do, or what they feel they were put on earth for, I mean no evil. Shared mental representations of possible relationships among distinct entities. The idea that we can figure out what we mean by our actions and what life means for us. So, if you review quickly the ingredients I'm pulling out of French and Germanic traditions, common or shared, something that's located in between, the method or procedure, the means to an end. Meaning, then, is a means to an end, which I think sometimes someone like me forgets because I tend to put my scale in as a DV. But I don't care about meaning to see numbers go up. I care about meaning to make life better for all of us, right? So that's very French of me. Happy medium, we don't even have this idea very often anymore, although we do talk about balance, but we really want balance of the best of the good stuff and not very much of the bad stuff, as opposed to really true harmony. Something that expresses a good balance, desired equilibrium. Then we have my favorite, to lament, attest, or make known, or to moan. What one has in mind, the underlying truth, significance, or importance, which itself is a deep idea. Intent, desire to be expressed, and the purpose to be served, or faith to be satisfied. So these are really the roots of, and again, if you think about the fact that most of us trace our way back to Franco, most of our, when we broaden out, we start talking about Adler maybe, we start talking about other theorists, all sort of influenced within the similar language tradition. So if I blend this up and dry it out and chop it into little pieces and centrifuge it, this is what I think is in all of these traditions. This is very different than the way that I've done this in the past. I don't know what if this holds water. This is food for thought. The most true significant intent one has from one's life, expressed outwardly, pursued via means and routes that link and balance important aspects of life to facilitate progress towards the desired end. Again, I've written a bunch of papers where I've tried to define meaning, and it never looks like this. So what do you all think? Is this a recognizable idea about meaning? Does it hold any advantages, disadvantages to the way that it's turned out now? Are you missing? It's wordy. Yeah.
I think it's lacking a little bit more of the inner dimension, and the more of the spiritual concept that we've been hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's lacking the inner life, the spiritual dimensions that we've been talking about a little bit.
I think it's like forward oriented, and if you're like 85, meaning is about back then.
Yeah, okay, so it's forward looking if you're at 85 or, well, either way, whether it's more about what happened in the past or looking back, that's also a source of meaning, right? Whatever age you're living.
What I'm trying to say is that I think where you are in the life course, maybe you count, that it's always about addressing important desires, and it's always it's actually looking back, making sense of all that.
Okay, so if you take it seriously as throughout the life course, it's not about looking forward to some desired end. It's about looking back and making sense of one's past life experience, and that's not really good. Maybe only when you're really old. Well, I think about high school a lot. I think about high school is not good. I'm still thinking about it, so, okay.
Yeah, I was to ask a question then, is can you have meaning without intent?
Yes, if you ignore the Germanic tradition, right? and Frankel and Klinger and all these sorts of things, right? So meaning without intent would be, is a great idea, right? Because you can just be. Existence can be meaningful, not meaningful isn't done or enacted.
They may be related. When you say express outwardly, I can understand in terms of translating from decision. Otherwise, I'm not sure why it needs to be expressed outwardly.
Yeah, so why would it need to be expressed that way? And then, so the method for all this, why it's in there, is because that's where it shows up, right? In a couple areas. It shows up in Klinger's book, it's all about behavior in some ways. And then in some of the linguistic traditions, you're signifying, you're doing, you're intending, your actions have to follow your intention, things like that. So, but does it have to be expressed outwardly? Can you have a purpose in life, let's say, that is, well, one reason to have it expressed outwardly is we still lacking behavioral markers for meaning in life after all of our work on this, right? It'd be sure nice if they could express something we could measure with a camera or some coder sitting in a room somewhere. So that's part of it too, but yeah.
There are times in my life when I've been seized by meaning and had to work to accept it. It didn't come from my intention.
So meaning has come almost like that faded arrow, that sense that you've been overcome with meaning. Seized by meaning is how you put it. And then you have to
Yes, from the outside, but also from inside, something that emerged for me.
Wow. So then it was it's a little bit like the struck from your horse by lightning. What is
More
this?
like a dawning,
And a confidence.
an epiphany.
Epiphany. I love that idea. Yeah.
Thinking about things that are meaningful being associated with our sense of soul. They ignite the soul. That gets manifested either externally, internally, mentally, spiritually. There's something ignited inside each of us, which the word soul is, again, comes with lots of connotations we can't quite get to, but
We would never talk about the spirit or soul in psychology, which translates to knowledge of the soul.
I know it plays back on Aristotle, but
Yeah.
that's what keeps coming. When you're speaking, that's all that I keep thinking about is it,
That's all, not my funny jokes.
sorry.
Okay.
Plant.
Yeah, that's true. So in some sense, this would maybe be reflected the most true, this idea of authenticity is inseparable, but it's not essential then even, right? There's like something about the essence that you're talking about, and like, if really you're tapping into the essence, it's like a nuclear reaction, like some power comes from that way outsized for what you're drawing it from.
I think this definition implies there's one chair for everyone, instead of I can have multiple chairs, because it's the most true significant intent. When
Yeah.
I have multiple true significant intents.
That is probably my fault, because there's nothing in any of the definitions we saw that would say that, so that's probably my compilation. I'll throw the rest on the Germans. Only from the 1200s, so yeah. So that's really interesting, I really like that. I think part of what we're missing in some ways is, of course, how do we get all this richness into one room and call it a thing? And then how do we figure out if we're really accessing and learning about that thing? So anything that moves us down that road would be brilliant for me to experience, maybe for all of us. Okay, so if we take a look at how these themes map up, and we're still missing a spiritual idea, we're missing an essential sort of core soul idea, we're missing the idea that meaning comes just as much, perhaps for sure, in later lifetimes by looking back as looking forward. Something, and I think your comment earlier also sort of captured that igniting from within. Like, what is the internal life that needs to be expressed? But so, Franco-Klinger and Germanic traditions sort of get around this idea that there's a true intent from one's life. And we can probably put intents, right? We balance multiple things we're trying to do that are all important. Expressed outwardly through behavior and language, maybe debatable. It's there. As a researcher, that would be great. As a clinician, particularly from a CBT standpoint, I sure like to see something to work with in the room, but who knows? And then linking and balancing important aspects of life, I really didn't hear anything that seems to fit. Right? We like the idea that somehow we have to bring all this messiness of our lives together. And then finally, pursue via methods and routes that facilitate progress. That's also debatable, right? We didn't all agree on that maybe as well. But maybe this is what the heritage we bring with us. Now we know that if you ask people, so who's asked that question of clients, researchers, whatever, what makes your life meaningful, or tell me about meaning in your life? Who's done that before? And has anyone thought that was a religious or spiritual question when you asked that? Okay, so there's not quite as much, but I often get that response, that it feels inherently, in some cultural settings, as an inherently religious or spiritual idea, and that's not really here either. This is very idiocentric, individualistic. Okay, so, but I thought, what if we tried to riff on some ideas? Okay, I don't know what I'm going to say now, but jam on some ideas about is there anything that can come out of this notion of, if you just take a look at the natural language uses over the centuries that people have used, can we get some ideas for implications? And a lot of this stuff is already embedded in the way that we do things. Some stuff that is obvious and already in the way that we do things I didn't put in there because I thought we could. When we help address goals, future-oriented thinking, and development of purpose, I think there's a great partner to that. Past-oriented thinking, consolidation, understanding, figuring out that sense of who we are and what life we live. Encourage people to pursue deeper understanding of themselves. Certainly no one's going to argue with that in this room, I don't think. If you do, that's cool, but I haven't heard anyone who said that authenticity is stupid. Support themes or narratives that enable the exploration of self-transcendence. So can you go beyond just what our life tells us we want right now? Facilitate ways to claim and enact purpose and true intention. Provide feedback regarding the alignment of one's purpose and living one's life. And then explore language and meaning and purpose. What do people do when they're talking about these sorts of things in their lives? We can try to encourage consistency of self across multiple domains and environments. Nurture flexibility and creativity for harmonizing diverse and competing commitments. Recognizing the commitments. And I'm actually a huge fan now, particularly as I've gotten older, about the idea of obligations. That we're obliged to do something. We receive a lot of benefit just by being alive, by having been raised in a family, by having been raised in a society. And I think we're obliged to do something. The world asks us to do something, and we ignore it most of the time, if you're like me. Okay, we bolster relationships through all these different activities. Consider uses of our finite time, energy, and talent. Broaden the definition of progress to include deepened wisdom, authenticity, perspective, not just success. And remember that the journey between points is as important as the origin or the destination. So the theme of journey really comes up, I think, a lot when we talk about meaning. I think when we talk about eudaimonia, when we talk about psychological well-being, they're all very process-oriented, right? They're not endpoint. They're not like even peak moments in the sense, or our peak moments because they teach us something. They give us a broader sense of reality. Okay, so glaring shortcomings. Language is just words. It's not science. It's not art. It's just some things that show up in a dictionary one day. That's a fallible approach as well. What I like about that approach is it doesn't make anyone an expert other than compilation. And it should be easily transportable. Any of you can do any of this sort of stuff in your own languages if you find the right dictionary to use, right? So if you do, and I hope someone does, and I hope we can sort of send these ideas around, like how often when you've gone and talked with people from other cultures, you're just like, what does it look like in your culture? I know it's gonna be different, and we're missing something amazing about the truth of humanity if we don't know what wells up from your culture. So I'd love to see that. That leads to the just English. How can that be enough? Obviously it can't. And then are there carryovers through levels of abstraction? That is to say, when someone says the meaning of a stop sign is you better stop, is that the same level of abstraction as the meaning of my sacrifice in this battle for freedom? Is that the same thing? Does it really carry over? Can we really use language that's designed for very pragmatic means to get a very, perhaps even spiritual meaning? The biggest question of all for me is meaning the remora or the shark. If you're swimming at the beach and someone says, get out of the water, there's remora. Right? You know the remora? No one cares. Remora is the fish that swims along with the bigger shark. And we don't have definitive data. I don't think that meaning is the shark. I know there's the best data that we have are those mortality data that Carol reviewed, particularly from the Rush study, because they have so many other covariates they're able to track within that, including level of disability, depression levels, right? So those are important mortality factors as well, and still purpose comes up. But we have 10 studies now, I think was the meta-analysis you mentioned, that show mortality. You can't die and then go back and have less meaning, right? So that's really good. We like that. We like that variable to study, and we're all accepting of death as moaning researchers, so I think we can talk like that. But I also, it gives me a chance to show this picture. Sometimes you do have to worry about the remora, right? So I just love the fact that they're all just hanging out. It's like giant fish suction too. They have this suction on the back of their heads that they just stick. And so they get all the food that the sharks miss. And so it looks like they're a big deal, because they're always where the shark attacks are. But they're not attacking anyone. So we still need to know if meaning from a scientific standpoint is the whale, is the shark, or is the remora. From a theoretical standpoint, we don't have to worry about that, right? Because we can show how important it is in the century. Okay, so I thought I'd break this down to 3 proposed efficiencies. This is the part of the talk I think is, even for me, kind of going to start getting really boring fast. So I'm going to go through it because it's there, but this is going to be our suffering and our attitudinal approach to this will be the only meaningful part. So, if we break down those ideas, we get to the sense that maybe there's 3 core efficiencies that our minds do. So I'm talking about minds now, I'm not talking about the brain necessarily. But to make meaning, we probably have to have some sort of social and self-interface. We have to differentiate between who we are, who other people are, how we act in the world, what the world is created. The most important world around us is the social world. So, that's where the needs will be. That's oftentimes where our purpose wants to transmit through. Judging responses to self or others. So we start to get to things that people have begun to neuro-image and build paths for. Self-referential processes. How do we know if the purpose is right for us if we can't judge anything about ourselves? How do we pursue our purpose if we can't self-regulate? And how do we gain awareness of our own mental activity? Which is interesting, we're not sure. So Veronica mentioned we don't even know if we have free will according to science. We don't know what consciousness is, where it comes from, or how to use it according to science still, right? So we're still working on some of these topics. And then finally, tracking progress towards abstract outcomes. What is more abstract than what your life is meant to be? So we need to be able to have these efficiencies and these competencies. If we just peek into one of these, this was where I started to die a slow and languishing death, was I wanted to track down all of the neurological and biological literature on each of those competencies. So I started with what I thought was be the most obvious. We have to be able to differentiate ourselves from other people, right? Okay, who's talking right now? You or me? I don't know anymore, right? Supposedly we do. So there's all these different tasks with the appropriate size Tesla magnets, 3 Tesla magnets, all the right paradigms, all extremely right-handed people, so they're not going to mess up this massive cortex. They're not moving, so we're not getting all these artifacts. Blah, 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 and everyone wears very soft-soled shoes, so nothing gets messed up at all, trust us, right? Pre-attentive orienting to salient or explicitly self-relevant phenomena is the simple way to put that. The even more is, this is fear conditioning, right? Something scary is going to happen. Well, who cares if something scary is going to happen? Me. I care if something scary is going to happen. So we assume that there's self-relevant processing happening, and they're praising how emotional those stimuli are. We start to see some things, these correspond to the colors if you're really a brain geek. We've got the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which shows up when pretty much thinking shows up, particularly anything that involves personality or self-reflection, but it's a pretty big area also. Then we have the anterior cingulate cortex, again, shows up in a lot of go, no-go paradigms. It shows up in a lot of the anterior part is very cognitive, posterior sometimes gets into emotions as well. The amygdala, striatum, we heard about this middle three already this morning. There are a lot of tests that show that people with high levels of eudaimonia seem to have optimized functioning in these areas. The striatum and insula together work. The insula is the part where, you've probably heard this, they plug an electrode into that part of the brain for a rat, and the rat will literally starve itself to death pressing that button. That sounds apocryphal to me, but that is the pleasure acknowledging center along with striatum. Very dopaminergic if you like that sort of stuff too. So that's one task. These 5. Let me go to another task. Describing oneself and one's preferences for stimuli, and only the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, again, a huge area, and the striatum are shared. Is something bad going to happen to me? Do I like something? Already, there's 2 very different systems. How are we going to make meaning out of all this? So this is where I started to give up, frankly, because these things don't even replicate. At present, the meta-analysis I read on this, and I read all the articles in there as well, there is no consensus that there's any identical part of the brain that processes me versus you. They can't agree. Isn't that alarming? Oh, that's crazy, right? So where are we going to go next, right? How are we going to get meaning versus satisfaction, meaning versus contentment, meaning versus social belonging? How are we going to get social well-being, psychological well-being, emotional well-being, right? So we've got, I was really hoping that the biological approach was going to be the answer for telling us that meaning is something we can work with in a lab. I don't think it will be. It can tell us if we're healthier. It can tell us if we process other things better, but we've got a long way to go. Especially if we have to start talking about the precuneus. That's dicey. You don't want to touch precuneus. Okay. And then there's even more, right? So they took a look at schematicity. So we see these hardcore cognitive things. Some people are very scientific. I'm a scientist. I'm a pre-med major, or I'm a molecular biology major. Some people are I'm going to be the next Michael Jordan in basketball and baseball. And so they've got schematicity, right? And then they see these stimuli that should be very athletic or very scientific. Man, if you really identify part of your core identity as being a scholar and a And these are extremes of both events, right? So these are gray groups for each. So this is where we start to see some similarities. We see some precuneus, amygdala, subgenual. This is the genuine, the big genus in the front. Subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, so where the brain kind of splits into over. Genuflecting, Catholic stuff there. Okay, or medieval reenactors, because they do that too. So we see again a whole list of stuff, and it shows up for a lot of these different things, but not enough. Basically where we're at now is we want to emotionally regulate our lives. We have to recognize some stimulus. That's going to happen in these huge parts of the brain that do a lot of different things. Actually, this is exactly to your point, Carol, where people are able to intervene cognitively and intentionally in their own responses to stimuli, right? If they've invested more in that quality. So we do see this. Is that meaning? Probably not, but it does tell us that if we can get really rolling on some of these ideas, then maybe we can put some in the lab and really say, this is really meaning. And this actually led to it. Because right now we have, this is meaning, but people who have a high sense of meaning have a high sense of every other good thing. So let's talk about it. And I also want to make this point. Now, Paul and other people here have objected because of just the nature of self-report research, right? So these are self-report, the purpose and life study, come back to Mahalik 1964, the meaning life questionnaire. And the big point here is that the average score is about the mean. So the title of this article is Life is Pretty Meaningful. Did anyone remember seeing this one? Most people, most places who take these surveys say that their lives are more meaningful than average, than the midpoint. So it can't be that hard, right? Here we are, we're like, oh, or at least I'm like, raising my hands, like, oh my God, what are we going to do about meaning? It's such a crisis. Maybe it's a crisis if you think hard about it, right? Especially if you nerd out over it, it gets really critical. So this is part of it. People find their way to meaning. But if we just catch it in the nick of time. So I don't know about you, but you say you study meaning, you're a world-famous meaning researcher from Russia, and you study these things, and someone says, yeah, but people don't care about meaning if they don't have food, they don't have good jobs, they don't have shelter. Right? You have to climb the whole hierarchy of Maslow's needs, which hierarchies and stage models typically don't replicate very well. But it's an appealing idea that we can't just jump to meaning and fulfill while we're running from bullets or snakes are biting us in the eye or whatever it is. But most people do seem to find meaning. Sorry about people who don't like that animal, the snakes, but this is the OECD one. I do want to spend a little time on this because this is the sort of headline grabbing graph. This is 2007 log transformed GDP per capita. So this is like what economists say is happiness. Across the country, if you divide up all the money their economy makes per person, countries that make a lot of money are awesome, happy. We did our job in Norway. This is before the oil prices crashed, but still, Norway's still doing well, right? But you can expect some countries are going to shoot even further down on GDP. Venezuela is one, for instance. And this is meaning in life, according to the Gallup survey. It's a one-question item. Do you feel like your life has meaning and purpose? Gathered in 2011, so it's not concurrent. Do these nation-by-nation studies very hard, of course. But we have lots and lots and lots of countries. And we see this line. What does this line mean? Who wants to tell us? That's the regression line that came out. It's, so explaining about I think the R squared is like 57%, 0.57, so it's massive effect that they're finding. What does it mean? Come on! Money goes up, meaning goes down. Okay, we're like, woohoo, yay, right? So like, we're pure people, we love our meaning. We're not, distracted by money. Those hedge fund managers can suck it. Whatever it is. We see this line. As nations become wealthier, the meaning in its populace disappears. If we view this as a process, right? If this is a snapshot and maybe everything's actually shifting in a different way, who knows, right? But we have this circle of countries, very, very wealthy, only 75% say their lives have some meaning. In Hong Kong, only 65% say their lives have some meaning. In Togo, Sierra Leone, 2007, so Civil War. It was pre-Ebola, but it was not a happy place by our modern standards. Maslow's hierarchy of needs not being met at all. Almost 100% of people saying there's some meaning in their existence. So, as we get richer, what happens to meaning? It seems to drag and die away. Also, the other correlates of meaning that held up even in some of the regression analyses. They didn't do all the regression analyses I wanted to do because I started to get really freaked out when I really dug into this. Because what are we trying to do in the world? We're trying to move these nations over here, right? What does becoming richer as a society do? It seems to lower social support that people feel they have access to. Again, I'm assuming causality because it's not interesting otherwise, right? What do we make of it? There's no cause and effect somewhere in here. Maybe we can start with meaning that people get poor. That feels like I have in my career, but it doesn't matter. Right? But we don't want to just like sort of say, if you choose meaning, you get to be poor, and that's great for you. Probably, since all the efforts are trying to push people this way, that's where it ends up. Lower religion. This is where this study focused. There have been all sorts of analyses, and lower religion was the mediator between GDP and loss of meaning. But they also see people have smaller families and much higher rates of suicide. Suicide is the opposite line here, right? So we're giving people everything we think they should have on Maslow's hierarchy of needs in order to be able to find meaning, and suddenly there isn't any there. So what are we doing? Is this what the trend is going forward? That as we increasingly focus on the individual, as we increasingly get wealthier as a country, we're draining away, we're losing those cultural, those ancient, those collective sources of meaning. And we're creating people who feel desperate on their own, right? So that's maybe not the existential vacuum. I'm worried that we have an existential desperation. We don't have meaning for people in our societies, but maybe if Frank was right and we have a will to meaning, they will try to find it. They'll find it on the internet. They'll find it among aberrant social groups. I understand, I missed it unfortunately, but I understand that someone raised the issue. Can a violent extremist be full of meaning? Who in 1939 probably would have rated highest on a purpose and life scale? Yeah, can we deny the dark side? If people need meaning, and I don't use these examples lightly because I think this is potentially a threat. I mean, I'm not an expert in this area, but what if we don't give people paths to meaning in the fabric of our societies as a whole? And in fact, what we're doing is we're buying other things that take away from what used to be the past. So people can't buy the new things to distract themselves, or as my favorite quote from Marty of all time, when they spend their time fidgeting unto death, which is what we maybe do. Like Louis C.K., right? I'm feeling sad. Will they find something to make it worthwhile? Would you? If everything was stripped away, would you give up and say, I guess I don't need meaning? Or would you maybe attach yourself to something powerful that propels you through life? I don't know, but what if what we're seeing isn't a crisis of, only not enough jobs? Right? The unemployment rate in the US is below 5%. Where do we see 4 mass shootings a day? The US, right? So maybe we take it seriously. So this is where I ended up. I don't know, I started with the Oxford English Dictionary, and now I'm saying we're all going to burn to death as meaning zealots, but imagine being my kids, right? But anyway, so this is kind of where I ended up. I'm wondering, what can we do? This is why I guess I perseverated so much on what are we doing with our field and with our passions and with our time. Some of you are doing incredible things. I don't think I'm doing anything important enough, but maybe all of us together. We figure out the how, we share the how, and we give better paths to meaning. Maybe it's not just because some philosopher said so, we feel it in our guts. Maybe it's because actually vulnerable individuals and the rest of us really need meaning. What do we really actually need it? We don't just say that. So I guess that's where I keep. So that's what I'll conclude for today. Again, I want to remind ourselves of my personal knowing. That which is shared becomes despicable. How can that be? Right? Is that a function of wealth? Is that a function of, as I can take care of myself, I assume everyone else can too. So have fun, good luck, dude. So this is what I'm wondering if I can bring it all together. But that's where I want to end up, because we don't have the tools to figure this stuff out. If we can advocate for this stuff, you need to start figuring out how to. At least I do. All right, well, thanks very much.
To our meeting conference since the first in 2000, the year 2000. So I'm very, very pleased that he was willing to. And I know you're tired, stretch and then come right back.